I realized my life, my reputation, was suddenly at stake, and I had to act before it spiraled out of control. She used every credit card, every favor from friends, every ounce of social leverage to force me into a wedding I no longer wanted. In early October 2022, I was preparing for my wedding with Laura in Austin, Texas. We had been together for 5 years, and the last 8 months had been spent engaged, planning what I thought would be the start of the rest of our lives. I worked as an engineer at a mid-sized construction company, earning a stable income, reliable but far from flashy. Laura worked as a marketing specialist for a trendy agency, and her circle of friends often talked about social status, expensive vacations, and designer brands. At first, I thought it was harmless chatter, but gradually I began noticing subtle changes. Laura checked her phone constantly, sometimes during meals, sometimes while we were talking about plans for the weekend or future trips. Her answers became short, clipped, and distracted, as if my presence required little attention. I could sense a distance growing between us, something I couldn't name at first, a quiet tension that hovered over ordinary moments. One evening, as we sat across from each other at our small dining table, the soft light of the kitchen casting shadows across her face, I felt an unfamiliar coldness settle in my chest. She spoke casually about her day, mentioning her friends in passing, and something in the way she described their opinions struck me sharply. It was as though she was letting me know without saying it outright that in their eyes, I was not impressive enough, too ordinary, too predictable. The words weren't direct, but the weight of them sank in immediately, a silent verdict on who I was and what I represented to her social circle. I felt a strange mix of disbelief and a tightening in my stomach, realizing that the foundation I had believed our relationship rested on was beginning to shift under me. The familiar warmth of home replaced by a subtle, growing unease. A few nights later, I made a decision that had been building quietly in the back of my mind, a decision that I knew would change everything. I began systematically dismantling the wedding preparations, moving through each step with a calm, deliberate precision. I called the venue first, canceling the reservation I had made months before, feeling a strange mix of relief and tension as the voice on the other end confirmed the cancellation. Next, I contacted the caterer, explaining that plans had changed, and felt a sense of finality as they acknowledged the end of our arrangement. The photographer was harder to reach, but eventually I ended the contract, noting the deposits that could not be recovered, but knowing that these losses were insignificant compared to what I was reclaiming for myself. Each call, each cancellation, was a quiet assertion of control in a situation that had begun to feel like it was slipping through my hands. I took the engagement ring back to the jeweler, a piece I had saved for over a year to buy, and felt a mix of disappointment and liberation as they processed the return and handed me a portion of the money. Holding the small envelope of cash, I realized the material loss was nothing compared to the weight I had been carrying, the pressure of trying to be someone else's idea of impressive. Returning home, I sank onto my couch, the apartment dark except for the faint glow of the streetlights filtering through the blinds. I sat there for hours, letting my mind move through the sequence of events, replaying moments of doubt, moments of clarity, and moments of sharp, almost painful realization. The silence of the apartment seemed to echo the emptiness I felt, but also the freedom I had never truly experienced before. For the first time in months, perhaps years, I understood what it meant to make a choice entirely for myself, without compromise or appeasement. The ache of the breakup was there, subtle but persistent, yet beneath it, a quiet exhilaration took root. I felt the contours of my own independence, the boundaries of my identity that had been blurred by the expectations of someone else, and the weight of her social circle. In the darkness, I finally admitted to myself that I would not step into a life where I was constantly being measured, evaluated, or found lacking. The relief was tempered by grief, but it was real and it was mine, a complicated, necessary freedom that I had carved out in a single, irrevocable evening. 2 weeks after the breakup, I received a call that would shift the situation from unsettling to alarming. It was from one of Laura's closest friends, someone I had trusted to remain neutral, and her voice was tense and strained. She explained that Laura had not accepted the end of our engagement and had continued the wedding preparations as if nothing had changed. Laura had used her own credit cards and the financial support of her parents to rebook the venue, hire vendors, and maintain the illusion that the wedding was still going forward. Her friends, apparently unaware of the seriousness of our separation, encouraged her, interpreting my silence as a temporary pause or cold feet, convinced that I would eventually agree to the ceremony. The realization struck me like ice in my veins. This was no longer a simple breakup. Laura had created a network of complicity, a system in which her friends reinforced her actions and validated her plan. She had even gone so far as to threaten that if I refused to appear on the wedding day, she would fabricate accusations capable of destroying my reputation. The thought of being falsely accused, the knowledge that social perception could be weaponized against me, made my stomach tighten and my chest feel heavy. I understood immediately that I needed to protect myself not just emotionally, but legally and socially. I began methodically documenting everything. I saved screenshots of messages from Laura and her friends, copied threads of group texts, and noted every detail that could later corroborate the truth of my position. Every new piece of information intensified the tension, each image and message a reminder of the stakes I faced. The ordinary heartbreak of a relationship ending had morphed into something far more sinister, a direct threat to my personal safety, my integrity, and the perception others had of me. The apartment that had once been a refuge now felt charged with unease, and I realized that the weeks ahead would demand vigilance, strategy, and a careful recording of facts to counter a situation I had never anticipated. I contacted a lawyer as soon as I realized the scope of what I was facing. Explaining the entire situation in detail and providing all the screenshots, messages, and records I had gathered. The lawyer outlined steps I could take to protect myself legally and advised me to involve Laura's parents to prevent any further escalation. I reached out to them, laying out the evidence and describing the threat she had made, the continued preparations, and the manipulation of her friends. Within a short time they intervened, confronting Laura and insisting that she acknowledge the breakup and cancel all the planned events. I watched from a distance as the network of control Laura had built around herself began to unravel. Her friends, previously caught up in her schemes, were confused and frustrated, realizing they had been used to reinforce her plans. Gradually, they started to withdraw, distancing themselves from her, leaving Laura exposed and isolated. I remained calm throughout, keeping my composure and avoiding any direct confrontation, understanding that reacting impulsively could only escalate the situation. I documented each step, each cancellation, and each withdrawal from my lawyer, creating a clear record of events that could be used if necessary. Sitting in my apartment, I could feel the tension slowly beginning to lift. The chaos that had threatened my reputation and sense of safety was being contained through deliberate, controlled actions rather than emotional responses. With every piece of evidence logged, every intervention confirmed, and every friend stepping back from the manipulation, a sense of stability returned. I felt a quiet, growing confidence, the knowledge that I had taken control of a situation that could have easily spiraled out of my hands. The fear that had haunted me since Laura's threats gradually gave way to the reassurance that I had defended not just my name, but my life, with deliberate precision and a clear mind. After the interventions had taken effect and Laura had begun therapy, I slowly started to reclaim the life I had put on hold. Her parents took control over her financial decisions and social interactions, limiting the reach of her influence and the risk of further manipulation. With that structure in place, I felt a cautious sense of relief, knowing that the immediate threats to my reputation and well-being had been contained. I returned to the rhythm of my everyday life, throwing myself into work with renewed focus, taking longer hours at the office, not out of obligation, but as a way to rebuild the stability that had been shaken. I also resumed exercising regularly, finding that the physical exertion helped release the tension I had carried for weeks. The act of moving my body became a way to process the emotional weight of the past months, each run and lift reinforcing the sense of control I had fought to regain. Old friendships that I had neglected during the engagement resurfaced, and I reached out to reconnect, finding that many of them were quietly relieved to see me stepping back into my own life with clarity and composure. Their acknowledgement of the truth behind the events and support for the decisions I had made became an unspoken validation, a reminder that I had acted rightly. I began to understand more deeply that personal value and self-respect could not be measured by the approval of others, by appearances, or by social ambition. The illusions that Laura had chased, and that her friends had reinforced, no longer held power over me. As her social circle slowly disintegrated around her, I observed the consequences of her manipulative behavior with a sense of quiet closure rather than schadenfreude. Every step I took, from rebuilding routines to re-establishing connections, reinforced the growing freedom I felt. The freedom to live according to my own standards, and not the expectations of someone else. In that space, I realized I could finally start making choices that aligned with my values, that prioritized my integrity and emotional safety, and that the life ahead could be built deliberately, without compromise or pretense. Several months had passed since everything with Laura had come to a definitive end, and I found myself reflecting on the events with a clarity I hadn't expected. The initial shock and tension had faded, leaving room for contemplation and understanding. I realized that true love and genuine connection did not depend on proving oneself to others or meeting arbitrary standards set by friends, family, or social circles. It became clear that the pressure to conform to someone else's expectations had been a distortion of what we had shared, and stepping away from it had revealed the value of honesty and self-respect. The money I had recovered from returning the engagement ring remained untouched in my savings account, a small but powerful symbol of the choices I had made for myself. It represented the tangible result of reclaiming agency over my life, a reminder that I had prioritized integrity over appearances and personal validation over public perception. I found comfort in knowing that I had acted decisively, calmly, and with awareness, and that those decisions had protected me from years of potential regret and unhappiness. I began to plan a trip I had long dreamed about, imagining destinations that had once seemed out of reach or unimportant amid the distractions of daily life and relationship stress. The act of planning felt symbolic, a deliberate step toward reclaiming my own time, my own desires, and my own narrative. I explored options, researched routes, and considered solo adventures, as well as trips with friends I had reconnected with, savoring the sense of independence and anticipation. In my personal life, I became open to new relationships, but with a cautious optimism rooted in hard-earned experience. I knew now that any future partner would need to value mutual respect, acceptance, and authenticity over appearances, status, or social games. I reflected on what had truly mattered: emotional honesty, shared values, and the ability to navigate conflict without manipulation. I understood that compromise should never come at the cost of self-respect, and that any partnership worth pursuing would be built on equality and understanding rather than validation-seeking or performance. As the weeks turned into months, I felt a quiet confidence settle over me. The storm of the past had left its marks, but it had also cleared space for personal growth and insight. I embraced the idea that life could be shaped deliberately, guided by my own priorities and values rather than by fear or obligation. The sense of moral victory was subtle but profound. I had survived manipulation, preserved my reputation, and reclaimed control over my choices. With that foundation, I looked ahead with a clear mind, ready to navigate future relationships, career decisions, and personal ambitions with the certainty that I would never again allow my life to be dictated by someone else's insecurities or expectations. Every morning felt like a quiet affirmation of the freedom I had fought to secure, a chance to live deliberately and authentically, and a reminder that the next chapter would be written with intention, clarity, and unwavering self-respect.